Our minds are more powerful than we think. How we think about life, how we think about aging, just the tone of our thoughts can influence the way that our bodies degrade down to the molecular level. Now, have you ever wondered why some 40-year-olds look and feel like they're 50, and some 50-year-olds look and feel like they're 40? Well, unlikely source as it is, Cameron Diaz got it right in the 2006 movie The Holiday, where she said, severe stress causes the DNA in our cells to shrink until they can no longer replicate. So when we're stressed, we look haggard. So how many of you in this room have some sort of life event happening that feels stressful? I see some people saying no. Good for you. I'm stressed right now, standing in front of you. I feel the cortisol in the room rising, so I know I'm not alone. Well, the way that we built our lives, especially in places like Boston, where we're busy and we value achievement and academics and striving for that next level, all of these things lead to chronic stress. And that's not to mention the stressful events that happen in our lives, no matter where we are or what we do, things like illness, death of a loved one, financial hardship, losing a home, losing a friend. All of these things are major stressors, and many of them are things that will happen to us, probably at multiple points over our lives. But how we approach these stressors, how we think about them even, impacts our biology down to the molecular level. Our negative thoughts are slowly killing us. Let me explain. Longevity expert Aubrey de Grey has spoken widely about the 7 deadly things that lead to damage in our cells, our bodies, and our minds. And I want to focus on one of these, which is chromosomal mutations, and specifically mutations to a structure called telomeres. Now, telomeres are the caps that sort of package in the DNA at the ends of our chromosomes, and they protect the DNA on our chromosomes from damage. They're a lot like the plastic at the end of a shoelace that protects the ends from fraying. Their main responsibility is to keep our DNA safe and free from mutations. Now, every time a cell divides, which is happening constantly, it's happening in all of us right now as you're sitting or standing or listening or thinking, cells are dividing. And every time that happens, our DNA is replicated. And every time a chromosome is replicated, your telomeres get a little bit shorter. Now, this matters because telomere shortening is one of the root causes of cellular aging. And when they get too short, they start sending out signals to our cells to stop dividing. And once that occurs, you have less regeneration, and ultimately you can lead to a host of problems, which leads to disease, among other things. Now, the good news is that telomere length is malleable. So in 2009, Elizabeth Blackburn, Carol Greider, and Jack Szostak all won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for their discovery that chromosomes are protected by these telomeres, and also by an enzyme called telomerase, which functions in a way that maintains but also lengthens our telomeres. So what's great is that, we have something that can lengthen our telomeres, but what's bad is that we don't produce as much of this as time goes on. So as we get chronologically older, our telomeres shorten. But the length is also negatively impacted by lifestyle factors, things like chronic stress, negative thoughts, toxic relationships. Even where you live can negatively impact your telomere length. There's also the obvious culprits like smoking, poor diet, poor exercise. Everything from your marriage to the neighborhood you live in has an impact on your telomere length, on your aging. A lot of these things are largely within our control. Now, there's 2 aspects that I want to talk about with regard to telomeres. One is how stress and lifestyle impact our telomere length, and the other is how our perception of stress, how our approaches to stressors impacts our telomere length, and therefore our aging. And to talk about this, I want to highlight a study that was done from UCLA and Stanford. Now, in this study, they looked at a group of women, and what they found was that those that were highly stressed had shorter telomeres. So they said, okay, let's follow them over the course of a year, and we're going to measure when they have high stress events in their life. And we have this hypothesis that the greater number of events that they have, the shorter their telomeres will be. Now, what they found was that for every major life stressor that happened during that year period, there was a significantly shorter telomere length associated with each one in a cumulative fashion. And while these effects were moderated by aspects like lifestyle choices like exercise or good sleep that could sort of protect against this stressful environment that people experienced, it showed that stress is directly impacting our telomere length. And these findings also illustrate that our telomeres are pretty malleable, Sometimes we can buffer them by engaging in certain lifestyles, and that can be really helpful. And while we want to treat aging in sort of a biological sense, and certainly I've talked a lot about that, we also have to think about the mind. And the mind-body relationship is incredibly complex. But we're starting to be able to interrogate that, and what we're finding is that attitude matters. One study that tackled this looked at how people perceived a stressful situation. So negative thinkers, they tend to view unfavorable situations with a threat response. So when that happens, your blood vessels constrict, your cortisol spikes, and it stays up, it persists. Now, high cortisol dampens your telomerase expression, and that's bad for your telomeres and bad for your aging. And unsurprisingly, pessimism is also correlated with shorter telomeres, and this was done in 2 independent cohorts. So looking at the other side of the coin, what we find is that people who see something stressful as a challenge to be tackled, you get blood flow into your brain, blood flow into your heart, you get this spike of cortisol that energizes you to tackle this challenge, and then it falls off and your telomeres are just fine. So what these data show is that perception of stress has a direct impact on our telomere length. And those who reshape their thinking under stress are able to improve their telomere maintenance, which means that just by thinking differently, we can impact our biology. Just by thinking differently, we can impact our biology. And to underscore this, I want to briefly tell you about a fascinating study that was done out of Yale. Now, this study looked at 660 people, ages 50 and above, and they asked them a series of questions and prompts. And they scored people based on their responses on having either low or high positive self-perceptions of aging. They followed up 23 years later, and what they found was those who had a high positive self-perception of aging lived 7.5 years longer than those with a low positive self-perception of aging. They had 7.5 extra years of life correlated with this perception difference. And they controlled for age, gender, socioeconomic status, loneliness, pretty powerful results. So they followed this up with another study of younger people, average age of 36.5 years, and they found a similar result, that negative perceptions of aging actually almost doubled the likelihood that someone would have an incident of a cardiovascular event in the next 38 years. So even the way that we think about stress, even the way that we think about aging, this matters because it impacts our decisions, which impacts our behavior, which impacts our biology and our pace of aging, our health span, and ultimately our lifespan. So next time you have a stressful event, take a deep breath, go for a walk, and remember that it really is mind over matter. Thank you.